This first one we're looking at is a Chassis Research K88, and this is from the late 50s. It was purchased in 1959 from Clary's Custom Motive, and it was raced in 1960 by Tom Seibert. You'll notice it's got a small block Chevy engine, a blower and injection setup. This thing is about as traditional as you can get. It's even got early style cylinder heads on it. It's an early style setup. After this car was run for a few seasons, it was put away in storage for over 30 years. Then it was restored in 1999 by Dwight Hall, Porter Schrader, and the help of a lot of different friends, and now it's under the care of Dave Huber. Another front engine dragster on display is a Dragmaster chassis, and this one has some significant history as it was one of Mickey Thompson's cars back in the early 60s. Now, Mickey Thompson experimented with lots of different engine combinations, and at one time he experimented with a 4-cylinder engine combination from Pontiac, and it ran in this very dragster chassis in 1960 and 1961. And because the pace of drag racing was so quick back then and things were changing and innovation was happening, Mickey Thompson ended up selling the car and ended up in Louisville, Kentucky of all places. So the car went through several different owners through the years, and ultimately it ended up in Dave Huber's hands in the 1980s. And he tore this thing all the way down and completely rebuilt it, put together this really cool engine combination. Of course, it's a small block Chevy. It's got a blower with a magnesium case. It's got a 2-port Hilborn fuel injection setup, and it's got tons of vintage speed parts all around. Now here's a really cool setup also on display with the junior stockers. This is a 57 Corvette, and you look under the hood, it's got a pretty stout small block, 2 4s. But the real interesting piece is when you look further back here. This car's actually got a trailer hitch on it, and it's got a custom single axle trailer with a front engine dragster mounted to it. So this is the ultimate combination, and believe it or not, these Corvettes and Tri-5s were actually used as tow vehicles quite often back in the day. And look at the combination on the front of this thing. It's got some really cool valve covers. Those are fin aluminum, but they've got risers to get them up high enough to clear roller rockers, and there's tons of great machined pieces on this thing. The engine mounts, lots and lots of great plumbing. Everything on this car is very sanitary. It's very clean. It almost looks like it's not even functional, but this car is functional. It's been raced here at Bowling Green in the past, so it's a great piece, and it looks so cool behind that Corvette. This is a Chassis Research front engine dragster. You can see it's got magnesium spindle mount wheels on the front with old crusty Goodyear front runner tires. You can see it's got a small block Chevy, mechanical fuel injection magneto. You got a cable drive tack up on the dash, I guess you could call it up there. It's got the Chassis Research dash plate, the Chassis Research aluminum steering wheel, and you can see those M&H Racemaster tires. Those things are looking good. Not something you'd want to race on, but they definitely look the part. It's got cool zoomy headers with the little caps over the top. But look at this tow vehicle. This is a Ford Falcon van. Now, a lot of people might refer to this as an Econoline, which it is, but you can see right there the Falcon badges. This thing is so cool. It's got some cool patina and rust, little 2-tone paint job, plenty of racing decals on the windows, Krager SS wheels, just the perfect combination here with the tow vehicle, the little single axle trailer, and one of the coolest old school dragsters I've ever seen. Oh, and you got to look at this engine mount and transmission mount on this thing. Super simple, just flat plate on the engine mount, bolts into a little tab, and then on the back where the mid plate would be on a modern race car, they've got this super cool little simple bracket that bolts to the back of the block, and then look, it's held to the frame with a hose clamp. This isn't just a tribute car or something somebody pieced together in their backyard. This is a car with history. As I look further into the information on this car, I see that it's a junior fuel car, which means it ran on nitromethane, but it was not supercharged. So back in the 60s, these junior fuel cars were very lightweight. That's why this thing's a little shorter than what you'd normally see on a mid-60s front engine dragster. And they also ran really small cubic inch engines. So this one has a 301 cubic inch engine, 3-speed transmission, and an Oldsmobile rear end. Pretty popular setup back in the day for this type of car. Now they're only asking $10,000 for this car, which seems like a deal for a car with history. It's got a bunch of cool pieces on it, including the Algon fuel injection system, and it said on the information that this car was actually sponsored by Algon. So really neat to see this thing is mostly complete. It's got a lot of history, and you could actually just clean this thing up and make it a very presentable piece in a museum, or maybe even do a little bit of work and make it a cackle car. This thing has tons of potential for only 10 grand. This was a really cool collection of top fuel dragsters. Now, a couple of these cars were based out of West Virginia, which seems like an unusual place for a professional race team to be based out of, but there was a lot of races up in the Northeast that they had access to. They had access to a lot of the races in Ohio, and not terribly far away from Indianapolis. So I guess West Virginia was pretty good after all. But these cars were restored to very high standards. You can see the paint, the chrome, everything on these cars are immaculate. Definitely a nice touch with the old beer cans covering up the header pipes. That was a thing they did back in the day. You see they're tied together with a chain, and they actually used authentic old beer cans like Schlitz and Old Milwaukee. I mean, that's pretty authentic. And the car on the end here is the Hundley and Boggs 1967 championship car. Now this thing's been restored beautifully. Look inside and out, it is immaculate. The engine looks like it's never even been run before, but this thing still makes noise. It still puts on a show, even though it's not going down the drag strip anymore. Now this is the Fox & Hull's Bellwether Automotive Special. It was a top fuel dragster that ran in the late 60s and early 70s. It had a Woody Gilmore chassis and a body by Tom Hanna, and it was owned and tuned by Don Fox. This car raced in the Midwest in NHRA Division III, and what you're seeing here is a recreation of this car's 1969 configuration. This is Chuck Williams' dragster that he built a couple years back. Now this thing is killer. Small block Chevy with a blower, a 2-port Hilburn setup on there. Really cool, and this thing makes a bunch of noise too. But check out the trailer, and look, he's towing it with what looks to be like a 47 Chevrolet Coupe. Super cool combination. Here's another cool front-engine dragster. Now this one's a really short wheelbase. It's got an early Hemi. Check out all these old school blower pieces. 4-port injection with a super cool looking scoop with custom paint on it. So many cool pieces on this engine, including that Iskandarian belt tensioner. That's a rare piece. And this thing is just restored to perfection. And you can see the paint and lettering is super simple, but also very clean, nicely done. The seating is very minimal. Not a whole lot going on the inside of this one. And you can see this car has kind of a wild roll bar setup where it kind of swells out there at the top, but lots of authentic details here. It's got steel wheels and pie crust slicks on it. Again, you can see right there the short wheelbase. This thing was probably a handful. This is the Cox Amos AA Dragster, and it's restored in its 1975 configuration. That's when it was last raced. It was driven by Bob Amos, and you can see it's got a Chrysler Hemi that's been bored and de-stroked to 388 cubic inches. It's got a magnesium supercharger on it and a Hilburn shotgun style injector on it. This car's got a lot of cool history right here in Tennessee. Now here's a really cool pair of cars that are both powered by small cubic inch Dodge Hemis. Now the first is a C Dragster, and this chassis has got a lot of history, but is now owned by Jim Mize, and he is an early small Hemi guru. And you can see this thing has got Hilburn fuel injection on it. This thing is set up as authentic as it can possibly be, and then sitting next to it is his Anglia, which is beyond authentic. This is the real deal. This is not a restoration. This is the old paint that was on this car back in the early 70s. It's still there. The Grand Marshal for the Wally Parks Nostalgia Nationals presented by Holley was Don Garlits, and he brought his Swamp Rat 12A. This is one of many Swamp Rat cars and historic drag cars that he owns and typically displays in his museum in Ocala, Florida, but he brought this one out to be amongst all the other historic cars in Bowling Green. And this is Swamp Rat number 15. This is the car that was built after Don Garlits had his famous clutch explosion that cut the car in half and severed part of his foot and led to the development of the rear engine dragster. So he was building the rear engine dragster. He never could get it to handle the way he wanted it. So he went back to the shop and built another front engine dragster. Well, his wife came out there and caught him in the act, said, "You're not going to go back out there in this front engine car and kill yourself." So he put this car to the side, finished building the rear engine dragster and refined it and finally got it to work right. And this Swamp Rat number 15 was never raced. It was completed, and it was actually sold to Goodyear as a display vehicle. They kept it for a few years and gave it back to Don, and he ultimately cleaned it back up and sent it up to McDonough, Georgia when Summit was building this building. So it's been up there for quite a while, and it's definitely a cool piece of drag racing history, although it never made a pass. Now this particular dragster is a car that we bought in 2021. I bought it from Tony McConnell, and if you want to go back and look at the video from Tony McConnell's place, he's got some killer old drag cars. So we bought this thing, and of course, like every other old drag car that I buy, I wanted to find the history on it. And I studied and I researched and I looked for weeks and months and, probably spent way too much time researching this thing. And I never did find an exact match. But what I do know is that a car with this wheelbase, with this style of roll bar, with these components would have been built in the late 50s or the early 60s, very early 60s. So this thing's got about a 100-inch wheelbase, and if you look at some of the components here, it's got an Oldsmobile rear end. It's got some unique pieces, but for the most part, this thing didn't have any truly unique components that made it stand out to where I could pick it out in an old picture and confirm its identity. So I never did track down its actual identity. I've seen some close ones, but from what I know about old dragsters, I know that there was a lot of homegrown dragsters that never saw the light of day. They never actually raced at a big race. Some never even raced at all. Still yet, a very neat piece and a cool piece if you wanted to stick a motor in this thing or hang this from the rafters. I mean, it's got a lot of potential for a conversation piece. We drug this old frame in a couple years ago, and it's taken this long for me to document this car. I mean, this thing sat for months without me even knowing any part of its history. And one day it just seemed to click. So I'd posted a couple of pictures of it, and somebody pointed out the odd-shaped main frame rails. This thing does have an oval-shaped tube for the main frame, which is not normal. Finally, after basically days of I can't think of anything other than searching for this dragster chassis, I found the right car. I mean, it clicked immediately. When I saw just the thumbnail of the picture, I clicked on it and was like, that is the car. I found that this dragster was owned and raced by Tets Ishimaru, and he was a Japanese guy who fully embraced the Southern California lifestyle as far as hot rods and motorcycles and stuff like that. So the earliest picture I found of this car was either late 1957 or early 1958. I know what you're thinking, the roll bar design is totally different, I see that. But this car did have this style roll bar in 57 and 58. It was changed, and I can show you on the car itself where the old roll bar was cut off and the new roll bar was welded on. The original setup on this car included an inline 6-cylinder engine, and what I found was this is either a Chevrolet or more than likely a GMC inline 6-cylinder, and it has a very rare Wayne 12-port cylinder head on it. Tets actually put a brand new 1958 Lincoln engine onto this dragster in 1958. At this point it had a log-style intake manifold with 8 two-barrel carburetors. The car made huge changes. He had a completely new induction setup going from the 8 two-barrel carburetors to a pot-vent-blown setup with a 2-port Hilburn fuel injector, and he also changed over to a standard dragster type spoke wheel on the front. I don't really know how much success he had at the Nationals. I don't have record of that, and I don't see any other pictures of this front drive setup on the supercharger, so it may not have worked to his advantage. He may have just kind of scrapped the whole idea, because in 1959 he came out with a new setup. He also updated the roll bar. One of the best pictures of the car, in my opinion, is from December of 1959 from Riverside. Iconic racetrack, iconic car, iconic picture. Number one, it helped me identify the car because it really gave me a clear shot of that frame rail, the gussets, the little support rails, the brackets, everything about this car. I can pinpoint it right here. I can show you the bolt holes for the tin work that go, the body that goes around. So this particular picture by Doug Peterson, that helped me really nail this thing down and say, for sure, 100%, this car matches my car. One of the coolest things to me is while I was doing research on this car, I found a guy who actually had video footage of it running. And it came from a guy named Giunji Nakamura. And he was around back then at Lines and Riverside and all those tracks in Southern California. And he watched this thing run. It was just a car that you always wanted to watch. It was a good running car. This Model A Ford Coupe pulling a single axle trailer with a Chassis Research front engine dragster on the back of it. And these two cars have been put together very thoughtfully. You'll see that this dragster has a lot of history. This thing has been put away for decades. It was actually hung from the rafters of a 50s style restaurant for years, and it lost a few parts along the way, but it is very close to being put back to its original glory. And we see we've got documentation here because this car was actually featured in the February 1964 issue of Hot Rod magazine. But I find it very interesting that it was featured in 1964 because it's a very antiquated chassis design. And then of course the engine. This is an old Ford Flathead. There's not a whole lot of technology going on here. It had an old style blower. It had old style everything. So very interesting that this car was getting some recognition. And you can see a lot of the pieces that were in this magazine article are still on this car today. This car started with a Chassis Research frame. You'll see that the front suspension has been modified from some of those early Chassis Research cars. It has a much more standard front axle setup, and these are all Kent Fuller components. The front axle, the shocks, and even the wheels are Kent Fuller. Very high-end pieces for the day. Out back, it's got an early Ford rear end that's been narrowed significantly to fit inside the chassis, and then outside it's got magnesium Halibran wheels. These are the smooth wheels, no windows. These are very early, very hard to find, and these are in immaculate condition. And they're mounted to a set of US Royal recap slicks. So these 8 2015 slicks, you'll see in the article it says it had 8 2015s. That's still what it has today. So this thing was originally put together by Richard Blackman and Jim Albert. And their whole idea for building this was to experiment with engine combinations, and they were going to produce a dual overhead cam conversion for Ford Flathead V8s. Definitely a high-end modification on an antiquated engine combination. So to my knowledge, they never put the dual overhead cams on this combination, but it does have Edelbrock aluminum heads on it. It's got a Scott blower with 3 two-barrel carburetors on there. It's got a body that was built by Bob Sorrell. The interior was by Tony Nancy, some big names in drag racing back in the day. And this thing has got so many cool pieces already, and they're looking for just a few more to finish it out. So the dragster itself is obviously a very cool piece, but you'll see that it's sitting on a very old school single axle trailer. That's another piece of the puzzle here, as it's set up to pull behind this Model A Ford. This thing is cool too. It's chopped, it's channeled, it's got a small block Chevy, wide white wall tires, a lot of old school pieces. So when you see this combination together, I mean, it is just too cool. Here's one I've been wanting to see for a long time. This is a Lyndwood Dragster. Now, we own a Lyndwood Dragster, but it's not anything like this one. This one is an incredible piece. Just look at the machinery here. This is a Chrysler Hemi. You can see those marine valve covers. Just so many great speed parts on this thing. It's got a big polish blower. It's got an Isky blower drive. This thing has got lots of great period correct components on it, and it's built to reflect a 1960 build year. So it's got a 4-port Hillborn setup on it. It's got a custom aluminum scoop. It's got a magneto. It's got all the right stuff for 1960, including that really short wheelbase. This was very common in 1960 to have about a 100-inch wheelbase. And this car has steel wheels with big gussets because they've been split and widened. Now, this particular car is the Joe Tucci Lyndwood Welding Special. This is a car that was campaigned in 1960 and it ran all over the country. This was a gas-powered dragster. This is not a nitro burning dragster originally, but it is now. This is a Cackle Fest type car. Now this car has an early Ford banjo style rear end. You can see that early version of the butterfly steering wheel. It's just made out of round tubing. You can also see that cast aluminum dash that's holding those two gauges. It says Lyndwood welding. Notice there's no D. That's actually correct for the car. It's just a work of art, and it really is cool to see because I have studied these Lyndwoods for so long. Because we've got an old Lyndwood chassis, you know, it's really kind of hitting close to home to see this car and see how well it's executed and how well it's restored, because I'd love to do something similar with our Lyndwood chassis. This is a really cool single axle trailer with a home-built front engine dragster on it. And the closer you get to it, the more cool stuff you see. And that includes a Crosley 4-cylinder engine, a little tiny engine, and an even smaller supercharger on it. I don't know what the supercharger came off of. I don't know what all is done to the engine as far as internals, but this thing's got to be a lot of fun, even if it doesn't make a lot of horsepower. And it's always neat to see an old car pulling a trailer with a dragster on it. This is more of a competition coupe, and it's got a Fiat body on it. And this thing has two NASCAR-style engines on it that are turned 90 degrees. This thing is a wild setup. It's got headers going everywhere. And I'm not sure exactly what this thing runs as far as an ET, but I'm sure that it makes a cool noise, and I'm sure that it smokes those tires without any problem. Here's a pretty wild one. This is a dragster before the Slingshot era came into play. The frame is just made out of C-channel. You can see that they've really opened up that front axle to reduce weight. It's got little friction shocks on it, 16-inch motorcycle wheels and motorcycle tires, and it's got a 24 stud flathead V8 with a really wild looking contraption for that cooling system, open headers, 3 deuces, and then we look back here, this is a Model A type body that's just kind of pieced together at the very back of the car, and it's got a very small roll bar in it. Not a lot going on back here. This is definitely a very simplistic drag car. On this episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, we're going to get a front engine dragster out of the woods, and we're going to put it back together using parts that have been stashed away for over 50 years. The dragster was built and raced by Jim Smith of Dayton, Tennessee. Him and his brother Tom built this car from nothing and made this thing a competitive car in the local ranks and raced at Harriman Drag Strip, Brainerd Optimus Drag Strip, which was in Hickson, Tennessee at the time, and then Loudon Drag Strip as well. Jim built a dragster out of drive shaft tubes and ran it for a couple of years, and it was small block Chevy powered, and he eventually wanted to build something better. So he started from scratch. This would have been in the 1961 off season, heading into 1962. Jim was a talented fabricator, and he was not afraid to try anything. And you can see that with this car. You know, he built every single square inch of it. He used an 1 5/8 tube for the majority of the chassis. He did use a little bit smaller tube for the truss supports, but the majority was 1 5/8. He gas welded it. And the only curved piece on the whole car is that main tube that goes around his head. And he couldn't bend it, and nobody around had the equipment to bend it aside from the local plumbing shop. So he took it there, brought it back home, welded it to what he had already assembled, and he had his bare chassis. Jim drove to Mableton, Georgia to get this 354 cubic inch Hemi engine out of a junkyard. On top of the Hemi engine is a Y-end Dragstar intake manifold, and it has 6 Stromberg 97 carburetors, which Jim modified to use with alcohol and nitromethane. The car had no transmission. It used a direct drive system that Jim built from scratch. He actually used a drum to make the clutch can, and inside of there it had a 52-pound Dodge truck flywheel and a Velvet Touch dual disc clutch. And then the rest of it was made out of a drive shaft and an input shaft. It was just kind of all pieced together to connect to that Buick ambulance rear end. After 3 seasons of running this car, the local tracks started cutting the purse for the dragster classes. And they were actually adding to the purse in super stock and the gasser classes of the time. And, you know, this was just discouraging for Jim, and he actually decided to take the car off the track and took it apart and eventually put it out in the woods with a few other old cars that he had in his collection. After we expressed interest in buying the old dragster, even more stories came out about it. When he had an idea of what we wanted to do with it, it was even better. He knew that we were never going to put this car back on the track again because the car's been sitting in the weather for decades. So it's rusty, it's rough, it's not something that you could actually drive anymore. But the history's still there, the parts are still there, the story's still there. So we wanted to get it out of the woods and put it all back together. Thankfully, Jim allowed us to do that. So we had to cut the tree down to get the chassis out. We also had to dig because the thing had just sunk down into the ground. But once we got that out of there, then it was time to start finding other stuff. We found the brake drums, we found the axles. The only thing that was really missing was the rear end housing. And Jim had told us that he had let some other racer borrow it to set up another chassis, and he just never got it back. So other than that, Jim pretty much told us where everything was. He told us where to look. For instance, the engine block and the cylinder heads, they were in the barn, which was packed full of stuff and kind of a little bit sketchy because there was not even really a path to get in and out of there. So after we pieced this thing together, me and Kyle put it up on his rollback. We took it back to the woods that we dug it out of, and we set it up, and I did a photo shoot on it again for the magazine. But I'm so glad that I did that because, it produced some of the coolest pictures that I've ever taken. In my whole career, it just was a cool moment to be back in the woods where this thing had spent so many years, and just the car, it was almost like it was alive again. Even though I know the engine is junk, everything on this thing is seized up and it's rough and it's rusty, but it was just like the car lived. Another fun thing that me and Kyle did was we loaded the car up and we took it up to the assisted living home where Jim was staying. His health was bad. He needed assistance 24/7. I feel like we kind of brightened one of his days by bringing that car up there. And one of the things we did too was take a picture of Jim with the car with one of his old trophies from Harriman Drag Strip. And that was just a priceless picture and just a fun memory for all of us, including Jim's two daughters, Angie and Jamie. And just one of those things that none of us will ever forget, because emotions were high because Jim wasn't doing well, and he hadn't seen this car together in decades. That's part of the reason it makes this car so special and makes this story so special, is the fact that we were able to get it out of the woods, get all the information that we could possibly get from Jim, and put it back together, show it to him before he passed away. So the timing of all this could not have been any better, all things considered. But again, we just hated to see him go so soon. Next up is another front engine dragster, this time an outstanding restoration of the Spirit. This was a AA fuel dragster, meaning it ran on nitromethane back in the day. The beautiful bodywork on this car is made out of aluminum, and it's a Hanna body, which that is top notch, the best in the business. And you can see some great paint work on this car, great chrome, great polished aluminum pieces, a lot of good stuff on this car. The lettering is right on point, lots of good shading, lots of good everything on this car. As far as the appearance package is concerned, this thing is right on the money. It's got a big 4-hole Hilborn setup on top of the blower, lots of good pieces here on this Hemi combination, and you can just see lots and lots of great details on this car. A little bit of upholstery work, parachute on the back, period correct tires and wheels on the back. Perfect setup on this car. Showmanship was a big part of the drag racing culture in the 1960s, and those see-through trailers was part of the deal. Along with the trailer, the car itself is pretty amazing. You can see this one doesn't have any bodywork on it, on the front side anyways, but it's a very clean, very nicely detailed car. Of course, we've got a blown and injected Hemi. They've got a little cover over that Hilborn hat. This thing's got a Krager blower drive on the front of it. And you can see on the bodywork there, it says Hustlers, Donovan, Pesek, and Lucas. And this car's got a great look to it. Excellent roll cage design. Some of these things had some funky looking cages. This one's got a great 3-point cage, Got a little wood grain butterfly steering wheel, lots of lettering on the back there. The patina on the magnesium wheels is perfect. This is another excellent example of a mid-60s front engine dragster. Now here's something you don't see very often. An old school front engine dragster with a Pontiac engine. Now this thing is super nicely detailed, and you can see the Pontiac engine's got a killer Hampton supercharger on it, and that does look like a mechanical fuel injection hat up there, but it's actually covering up a carburetor, which makes this thing much easier to fool with. They've got this thing set up to where they can crank it up and make some noise at a car show like this, but the interior looks cool. It's got a little bit of upholstery there on the old school seat. You can see the handbrake, the butterfly steering wheel. The slicks look cool on there. They've got the right size. They're not old, they're actually a modern slick, but the engine is where it's at on this thing. It's got a killer looking setup, and even though that injection hat is actually just a fake over the top of a carburetor, it still has the right look and gives this car the traditional 60s appearance. This one has an inline 6-cylinder engine. You can see that chassis design is really cool looking. It's got a torsion bar front suspension. It's got lots of good vintage pieces on it. And then of course for horsepower, this appears to be a Ford inline 6. You can see it's got a Clifford intake manifold, 4-barrel carburetor. And even though this thing doesn't leave the line with a lot of force, it still runs down in the 6s in the 8th mile, which is pretty respectable. Who would have ever guessed that a dragster would be cut in two and just kind of stuffed into the crack between two junk cars? My dad and I were pretty excited to see this thing. We started climbing and digging and clawing, trying to get the two pieces of the dragster out of its hole and get it out into the clearing where we could kind of piece it together and just take a look at what we're getting. So as it turned out, we didn't have any problem loading this junk into the back of my S10 truck. It fit right in. We put a little strap around the tailgate and we were good to go. So that's a pretty easy way to haul a dragster. If you just cut it in two, you can put it in pretty much any truck. And as sort of a bonus, I didn't realize this was part of the deal, Elmer actually had the rear end out of this car, which was a cut down 55 through 57 Chevy rear end. Of course, it didn't have the chunk or anything like that, but the housing itself, a narrowed housing with the plates and everything where this thing would just bolt right in. And we got it home, put it in the garage, stared at it for just a minute, and then put the two pieces together, and my dad welded them up just with the MIG welder. You know, we didn't do anything to make this thing strong. We just wanted it to sit up right and sit up on wheels. So if we were to ever actually put a motor in this thing, we would want to strengthen that a little bit. But for now, it's just butt welded with a MIG welder, and that's good enough. From the looks of the mounts, this thing had a Chevrolet engine in it. Who knows? I mean, there's very limited information on this car. I don't know any of the history aside from the guy cut it in two. That's really about it. The rear section of the frame is a little bit sketchy. Actually, you can see the threads on one of those bars, and that tells you that that's water pipe. I mean, they're threaded on the end. So, you know, to see that, it kind of tells you what the rest of the chassis is made out of, and then that worries you a little bit. But again, we're not ever going to drive this thing. This is static display only. We're going to take a look at David Stewart's Gizzle hopper, and this has got a really cool little body on the back of it, but essentially this is a front engine dragster style chassis. The coolest part about this one is it's got an MEL engine. So that MEL stands for Mercury, Edsel, and Lincoln. They made a totally different engine than Ford did in the late 1950s. And you'll see the headers, they're not quite weed burners because they're not pointing down at the ground, but they're definitely not your typical zoomies that point up. So standing around this car while it's cackling is a little bit dangerous unless you want a face full of nitromethane or you want your hat blown off. Next is the Dragster of John Jones, and this one's got a really special engine. This is a 427 Cammer from the Ford Camp, and this thing's got a polished blower and an Enderley style injector hat on it. Very, very nicely built car. You can see those magnesium valve covers have turned, but everything else is polished and very nicely finished on this car. It's got some white wall pie crust slicks, some slots on the back, a really neat looking piece. But you can tell that this car is not running on quite as heavy of a load of nitro as the others, but it still makes some great noises. And finally, the king of the Cackle, the Nitro Syndicate front engine dragster. This thing has got a heavy load of nitromethane in the tank, and it's got a killer 392 based Hemi engine. This thing will absolutely rattle your brain.